Today, we're here to talk about a public health crisis that preceded and has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, something that we both care deeply about. I'm referring to adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and the impact of childhood trauma on lifelong health and well-being. Ms. Winfrey, I am so grateful to you for joining me today and for taking the time to speak with us about your book, What Happened to You?
Well,
and your ongoing efforts to raise awareness. So thank you.
well, you are the leader in this. You have been working like in the fields on the ground, trying to get people to understand what it is and what the impact of ACEs has on all of our lives. Anybody who has experienced, one or two or even many. And one of the reasons I wanted to write the book with Dr. Bruce Perry is because the realization of what happened to you literally colors your entire worldview. It shapes your entire worldview. And understanding what happened to you and also what happened to other people who are in your family, in your environment, in your work space, changes the game. It just changes the way you operate. And that question has literally changed the way we operate our school, so that we knew that I first knew what ACEs were what an ACE test was, because girls coming to my school in South Africa were taking the ACE test, and on average were scoring a 6 because they were coming from really traumatic backgrounds at a time when AIDS was 1 out of 4 people, and every week we had to tell another child, you've lost a parent. So I was aware what it was. I wasn't really aware of the long-term impact, which is what you have been doing for years. So congratulations on the fact that you have been so steadfast that now this becomes a conversation for the public that can actually be heard. Because you've been saying the same thing. You've been saying it, and then you try another way to say it, and now we're going to try this way to say it. And finally, I think it could be heard.
Well, I will say, first of all, I loved the book so much. Dr. Perry is a friend and colleague. I will say, I know a lot about ACEs and childhood trauma, but I learned so much in reading this book. Oh, yes. Yes, I enjoyed it so much. And one of the things that came to mind for me, because yes, I have been shouting this from the rooftops for a long time, and I kind of relaxed a little bit because I was like, oh, if Oprah's talking about it, maybe I can retire. Like,
No,
I might go just work in my garden for a little bit.
No.
But,
it means we need to combine forces and even shout it even louder, because I think it's life-changing. One of the things that makes me so happy that I did this book, and I wanted to do it because I'd had a conversation with Dr. Perry on 60 Minutes, talking about this very question of what happened to you, when we were talking about an institution called St. A's in Milwaukee that uses trauma-informed care for all of their children and clients. And when he said it to me on the air, like the question that people should be asking when they're dealing with kids who are misbehaving, and particularly, young Black boys in the classroom who are suspended and are then labeled and then are put in the, bad boy school. The question should not be what's wrong with this boy, what's wrong with this child, but what happened to this child. Like a light went off for me. And, I'd been talking about it for years on the Oprah show. And suddenly, just like we were talking about, you tried this way in, and then you tried this approach. Suddenly that what happened to you question hit me in a way that all the other conversations had not. And I was like, oh, that is what the issue is.
it's a systemic issue. It's a systemic issue. Even for those of us who have been asking the question, what happened to you? Well, we've been doing it so much at the individual level. All of society looks at the individual and says, you've got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's the individual family, the individual healthcare provider trying to treat families. And one of the things that I realized is that this is a public health crisis. And that means that we have to take a public health approach. And one of the pieces that is so fundamental to a public health approach is raising awareness. And that is what this book does. That is what my office has partnered with an organization called the ACE Resource Network to create a national public education campaign called numberstory.org, right? And it's really to help people begin to understand what is the story of your number. What does it mean in terms of your health and your well-being? And most importantly, recognizing that the number of ACEs that you've experienced, it doesn't define you, right? You get to say how your story turns out. And
it doesn't define you. It does leave an imprint, and you need to be aware of what that imprint is.
That's right.
It certainly does not define you. It certainly does not define you.
You know, one of the things that I hear all the time, people ask me all the time, like, what's the difference between ACEs and trauma? It's all trauma are all ACEs traumatic, all of these different things. And one of the things that we understand is that what you and Dr. Perry described so beautifully in what happened to you is the impacts of trauma, how that can affect a child's developing brain and body. One of the things I love about the ACE tool, and part of the reason why the state of California is training all of our healthcare providers on how to screen for ACEs, is because the 10 ACE categories that the CDC and Kaiser looked at are potentially traumatic, but because you've experienced ACEs, it's not a guarantee, it's not determinative. But one of the things that is important is it identifies which of us may be at higher risk. And in that sense, identifying ACEs is about prevention. Because when we understand who may be at higher risk, what the science shows us is that when we do early identification and early intervention, we can actually prevent harms, right? And that is what public health is all about. It's all about prevention.
I think most people don't understand the correlation between having had adverse childhood experiences, because people are like, yeah, that happened. I remember, when I first started doing the Oprah show, people were like, yeah, that happened to me, but so what? So what? You need to move on in your life. That was the way of thinking, particularly in the African-American culture. Like, I'm not going to go see a shrink about it. I'm not going to talk to somebody about it. I'm going to go pray about it, or I'm going to keep it to myself. And that doesn't matter. I remember literally doing a show once where there was a young Black woman who's saying, yeah, my father came pulled me from the choir one day and beat me in front of the church. But, I'm fine. Nothing happened as a result of that. And I said, it's impossible to be pulled from the church choir and beaten in the church and not be severely humiliated and damaged by that. It's impossible. You just haven't thought about it. You had to tell yourself that it was something else. And so I think the thing that you have done that is so significant is allowing people to see how ACEs define toxic stress later on. Can you speak to that for a bit?
Yes, absolutely. So what we now understand is that when we experience adverse childhood experience, every time we have one of these experiences, especially if it's repeated or severe, it activates our biological stress response. And this is particularly critical for children because children's brains and bodies are just developing. And so our brains and bodies develop in response to our experiences. And so these adverse childhood experiences actually affect the way our brains and bodies develop. And it can lead to making our biological stress response more sensitive. So it's sensitized, but it can also make it overactive or have a prolonged activation of the biological stress response. And that is what many doctors, especially in pediatrics, now refer to as the toxic stress response. It's that prolonged activation of the body stress response. It's at high levels of adrenaline or cortisol or all these different stress hormones that actually affects the way our brains and bodies function.
Yes, and I think we've got to do a better job of helping people to understand that there is a biological stress response that really you're not even able to control because of this thing that happened to you so many years ago, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And our one of the things that's so important is to recognize that we have a biological stress response. It's like, you know, we have a heart, we have our cardiovascular system, we have lungs, we have a respiratory system, and we have a stress response system. And it can be well regulated and healthy, or it can become dysregulated. And if it's dysregulated, that increases our risk for physical, mental, and behavioral health disorders. But the good news is that there are lots of things that we can do to help to regulate our biological stress response. And that's something that you and Dr. Perry talk about in What Happened to You.
Well, you know, it's so fascinating to me that we took this approach, the neurosequential model approach to our school, and helping girls to understand the answer to that question of what happened to you at my school in South Africa, because we were having all kinds of, you know, when you have an average of 6 aces for every girl in the classroom, you know, one of the main issues we had with girls in the beginning, and these are brilliant girls, they're so smart, they, you know, 20 of them came to the United States and they're at schools ranging from Spelman to Brown to, you know, Stanford, brilliant girls who have had really terrible things to happen to them. And, you know, in the beginning of teaching, the teachers realized that, you know, these girls were disassociating. They didn't have the term disassociation. They just thought, what's happening to this kid? This is supposed to be a smart girl. She's in class and all of a sudden she's like not with us or daydreaming or off someplace. And so we realized that this was happening more and more, and literally consulted with Dr. Perry about what we could begin to do. So the last time I was in South Africa was just before COVID. And we have taken this, you know, trauma-informed care approach to our school, and all the girls are aware of that question of what happened to you. And I was sitting in a classroom and a girl asked me, what should I do when I'm trying to regulate myself and someone is being dysregulated and their dysregulation is dysregulating me? So I thought, wow, we've gotten to the point where the language even is common in discussing how we begin to heal ourselves and begin to regulate ourselves.
That's right. That's right. And what happened to you? That is the question. And when I believe that knowledge is power, when we know better, we do better. And that is, you know, why we put forward the numberstory.org campaign. Folks can go to numberstory.org to learn more about their own ACEs and get resources. But really, this is a paradigm shift that I believe is as fundamental as germ theory. It changes how we treat disease, what we do in our schools, law enforcement, how we interact with our colleagues. And I just want to say thank you, Ms. Winfrey, for just putting your profound and powerful voice behind this issue. I agree, this is one of the most important issues of our generation. and excited to be working alongside you in this important work.
This is wonderful work that we're doing. Finally, I think we get to the root of why people behave the way they do.
Yeah.
And that question, whether you are a professional or, dealing with children every day, or if you're just somebody who, is at work and you see somebody who is acting out, which, as we know, people bring all their stuff to work. Asking that question of what happened to you literally shifts the paradigm of empathy and understanding from what's wrong with you, what's wrong with that person. And I just want to reiterate what you said earlier. Our childhood does not need to define us. It doesn't mean that asking the question and answering it now means you're going to be defined by all the bad things that happened, because I'm also a 6. My number is a 6. It means that you can take that and turn that pain into something very powerful for yourself when you begin to understand exactly what it is.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think with that, I'll just say thank you. Thank you so much. And looking forward to more to come, more conversations.
Boy, let's have more of these. I think this is fantastic. I love working with you. Just love it.
Thank you.
I just love working with you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor.
Thank you. For me too.